Fidel Castro was born into privilege, the son of a wealthy landowner who owned thousands of acres of farmland in Cuba. But despite his privileged upbringing, Fidel's path was never one of quiet luxury. Even as a young boy, he displayed signs of rebellion and boldness. He was intelligent, outspoken, and fiercely independent. As a student in Havana, he was drawn not to academics, but to the heat of political debates and protests. He joined university student groups, attended political meetings, and quickly became known for his powerful speeches. At a young age, Fidel became convinced that Cuba's problems couldn't be solved through reform. He believed the system itself had to be destroyed. His beliefs hardened when, in 1952, General Fulgencio Batista staged a military coup, canceling elections and seizing control of the Cuban government. Batista's regime was brutal, corrupt, and backed by foreign powers, especially the United States. For Castro, this was the final trigger. Instead of accepting the dictatorship, he chose resistance. He gathered a group of young rebels and planned a daring attack on the Moncada barracks, one of Cuba's largest military installations. But the plan failed. Many of his comrades were killed. Fidel was captured and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Even in jail, Castro never gave up the fight. He used the time to read, write, and refine his vision for Cuba. His speeches and letters were smuggled out of prison and distributed across the country. His message was clear: Cuba needed a revolution. After serving only 2 years, he was unexpectedly released as part of a political deal. Rather than lie low, he went straight into exile in Mexico, where he began to regroup. It was there that he met an Argentine doctor named Che Guevara. The two men immediately connected, both driven, both radical, both ready to risk everything for their ideals. Together, they formed a small band of fighters and began training for a second attempt at revolution. In December 1956, they set sail for Cuba on a small yacht named Granma. The journey was rough, and the landing was a disaster. Most of their fighters were killed or captured. Only a handful, including Fidel, Raúl, and Che, escaped into the mountains. But from those mountains, the revolution began to rise. Castro led a guerrilla war against Batista's forces. He won support from farmers, workers, and students. He used radio broadcasts to spread his message across the country. Every time Batista's army tried to crush the rebels, they slipped away, regrouped, and struck back harder. Over time, his forces grew in strength and numbers. Town by town, city by city, Batista began to lose control. Finally, on January 1, 1959, Batista fled the country. Fidel Castro had won. He marched into Havana like a hero. Crowds filled the streets, shouting his name. He promised justice, dignity, and a new beginning for Cuba. And for many, he delivered. He nationalized industries, redistributed land, and launched campaigns to improve education and healthcare. Schools were built. Doctors were trained. Illiteracy dropped. For the poor and the forgotten, it was a revolution of hope. But that hope came at a price. Castro ruled with absolute authority. He silenced opposition, censored the press, and jailed critics. Political dissent became dangerous. Many fled the country, especially to the United States. As Castro aligned with the Soviet Union, the U.S. responded with hostility. In 1961, Cuban exiles, backed by the CIA, launched an invasion at the Bay of Pigs. Castro's forces crushed them. The failure embarrassed the U.S. and strengthened Castro's grip on power. The next year, in 1962, the world came to the brink of nuclear war. Castro allowed the Soviets to install nuclear missiles in Cuba, pointing directly at the United States. The Cuban Missile Crisis was one of the tensest moments in modern history. Eventually, the Soviets pulled the missiles out, but the distrust between Cuba and the U.S. deepened. Over the decades, Castro survived multiple assassination attempts. He outlasted 10 U.S. presidents. He became a symbol of defiance for some, of oppression for others. At home, he maintained support by standing up to the world's biggest superpower and keeping basic needs accessible to the population. But economically, Cuba struggled, especially after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. The subsidies stopped, the oil stopped, and the country entered a deep crisis. Food was scarce. Electricity was unreliable. People were desperate. Castro's government adapted. They opened limited tourism and allowed small-scale private businesses. Relations with the U.S. slowly began to thaw. But Fidel's health was fading. In 2006, he handed over power to his brother Raul. He officially stepped down in 2008, but remained a symbolic figure. In his final years, he rarely appeared in public. His presence, however, still loomed over Cuba. On November 25, 2016, Fidel Castro died. His ashes were buried in Santiago de Cuba. The nation mourned. But in exile communities, especially in places like Miami, people celebrated. To some, he was a revolutionary hero who stood up to empire. To others, he was a dictator who crushed freedom. Fidel Castro's legacy is complex. One man, two stories. A liberator and a tyrant. A visionary and a ruler. Loved and hated. Remembered forever.